Good morning.
It's good to be.
When I saw the title of this panel, I couldn't help think about the movie Madagascar. Welcome to Move It, Move It. It's going to be a fun panel, and welcome to the VICA 24th Annual Business Forecast Conference. My name is Carlos Illingworth. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations at Vons, and Vons is proud to be a sponsor of this runway. I also like to thank our panel sponsors today, Metro and Walmart, my good friend Javier. At your seat, there's an exit survey for this panel. I encourage you to fill out that survey and provide it to one of the VICA staff members or ambassadors or in the back of the room. These surveys help us plan for next year's conference. You can also submit the forms to the information booth in the lobby. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator for today's panel, Javier Angulo, Director of Community Affairs, Public Affairs, and Government Relations for Walmart. Javier, thank you for agreeing to be our moderator for this morning's panel.
Thank you, Carlos. I'll take the mic.
There you go.
Thank you, sir.
You got it.
Oh, that doesn't work. Again, thank you, Carlos, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here in front of all of you, especially because Walmart knows a thing or two on logistics and making products and goods move. So really a pleasure to be here. The theme of today's panel is Move It, Move It. We have a great panel lined up to discuss goods movement in California, but let me first thank Metro for joining us and sponsoring this panel, as well, of course, our runway sponsor, Vons. The biographies of each of the panelists are already in the journal, so I'm going to make brief introductions so that we can have more time in making questions. So I'm going to introduce the panelists now. To my left, we have Chris Chase, Business Development Manager for the Port of Los Angeles. Next to Chris is Dr. John Hewson, Vice President and Chief Analyst for Economics and Politics Incorporated. And Scott Moore, Western Region Vice President of Public Affairs for Union Pacific Railroad. And to my right, I have Chris Shimoda, Environmental Policy Manager for the California Trucking Association. I'm going to give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to make an opening statement to get things started. I have a few questions from myself for every one of the panelists, and then we will open up the panel for questions from the audience. So I'm going to give each of the panelists 2 to 3 minutes, starting with Chris.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us here. For those of you who aren't aware, just down the road from us a bit is the largest port complex in North America. I'm on the Los Angeles side, but my partner in crime next door is the Port of Long Beach, and we share a common border. For those of you who go back a little bit, we used to be divided by the U.S. Navy, but when they left, we are now all one physical location, and we touch borders, but we do a lot of projects together. But in terms of where we sit in the world, individually, the Port of LA is about the 10th biggest container port in the world. Long Beach is 12th. Combined, we're 5th or 6th, depending on the year right now. So we are a major player in moving goods to your store shelves. And that's always really the connection that people see with the ports. I mean, it's very interesting to go around Southern California and not realize that in all we have in Southern California, that we do have this gigantic port complex that provides so much for the area without people thinking about it. There was a great story, a number of years ago in the New Yorker talking about one of the newer generations of ships back then that was big for the time, and they said, in this computer age, everything was moving to, online shopping, but no one's ever had a pair of pants delivered by a T1 line. No matter what you do today, no matter how much technology you have in your house, you still can't get a pair of pants delivered without the retail and logistics chains that we all work with, and this whole group up here is part of. And that's one of the exciting things, and one of the exciting things that the Port of Los Angeles has to offer for Southern California is you have an opportunity to see the basic level of economy, what moves, what goes in, what goes out. So we're going to talk about some numbers probably during the course of the day, but some interesting things to think about is that we are having some of the biggest record export years ever from California. The exports have done fantastic during this downturn. They have helped bring us out of it. We don't always think about that here in California, and one of the big things that brings us out is food products. I know we're in parts of Los Angeles that used to be, populated with orange groves and other trees, and we've taken those out and put up warehouses. They do the same job. They bring people in here, and you export and import from California. It's pretty amazing. And the food products have been going out, has been quite substantial, so it's kind of exciting there. But as my partners will say here, we do have a great connection to the rest of the world. Most of the goods sold on store shelves here in North America will often come through Los Angeles. We did a study, and in talking with our folks in Congress, we touched every single congressional district in the United States with the exception of Alaska. So from Southern California, we touched every single congressional district. That is the scope of what we have here, and that's a great opportunity. That's what's growing. We are supplying and we are hiring people to manage the goods that people want to buy, use, and create all around this country. So that's one of the real positive things here in the Port of Los Angeles. The other neat part is that we're on the waterfront, and everybody likes the water, and we've got big ships coming in and out. And I usually have a visual up here we'll show you that our ships today are about the same size as the Empire State Building is tall. So if you can take that into consideration. And we complain about the traffic on the roads. Yeah, these ships carry about 10,000 trucks. Just keep that in mind as we go along. So don't swear at them too much when you're on the freeways. Look at all those cool, colorful boxes. There's some really neat stuff going on there. And think about whatever you bought or whatever you sold or whatever you see, how did it get there? And the fact is, it's probably going to come through the port. It's probably going to touch the roads that we see, but it really is a neat way to keep the economy rolling here in Southern California.
Thank you. Dr. John Houston?
I am not part of the supply chain. I am an economist. I'm kind of a blue-collar guy. My dad was a machinist. My brother was a trained machinist. He runs all the equipment now in a major winery up in the Napa Valley. But where I come at this is specifically looking at that part of our society that absolutely needs blue-collar jobs to move to the middle class. One of the problems I find in this state is we have defined public health very, very narrowly. We have defined it as emphysema and cancer related to airborne particulate matter and airborne gases. With all due respect, if you're going to have, as a matter of state policy, put in place by single-issue agencies suppressing manufacturing, logistics, construction, and mining, what you're doing is saying to those people who need blue-collar jobs, we, as a matter of policy, are going to stop you from getting to the middle class. With all due respect, that is a public health issue of a completely different kind, because you're saying unemployment, underemployment, and lack of access to middle-class jobs are now a matter of policy in the state of California, driven by people who are not poorly educated. Yet if you look at the figures in our particular area, in Southern California as a whole, 42% of our adult population in 2011 stopped their educations with high school or less. If you look at the alternatives to get blue-collar jobs, every one of them will not support a family. But those four sectors, including logistics, will. And logistics has the advantage of being the one sector that is really solidly growing. I like to say that the California legislature did one thing absolutely right. They put California on the West Coast. When it comes into the United States, it runs into this area first. So we are seeing that sector out in the Inland Empire, where I'm a specialist. What we're seeing in that particular area is it's the second fastest growing sector. We're up not quite 7,000 jobs August versus August a year ago. And it is the right kind of jobs for a population that has the kind of numbers we have in terms of its educational attainment.
Thank you. Scott?
Well, 150 years ago, Abraham Lincoln created our company with really the purpose of connecting the nation with California. And when you're 150 years old, well, there can't be a heck of a lot new, most people would say. But the fact is, we're still working on better connecting California to the rest of the country with our railroad. It's one of those things where not much new. Last year was the safest year ever in our railroad, 150 years. That's including our employee accidents, grade crossing incidents, and things like that. Toxic inhalants, the stuff the federal government makes us move that we just as soon not move, to tell you the truth. We deliver them 99.999% of the time without an incident. That's what rail can do. Certainly environmentally friendly and efficient and getting more so all the time. You know, it's one of those things that a steel wheel on steel rail is centuries years old, but still that lack of friction makes things work very well. You know, you can't build a train track everywhere, and that's why the trucking industry plays a key role in moving California. But to give you an idea, if you were to take the fuel and put it in a train and then put it in 435 trucks and take off for Houston, those trucks are running out of fuel somewhere east of Yuma, and the train to get all the way to Houston. And on a distance like that, it makes sense. You know, here in Southern California, you know, we have a line that goes up to Santa Barbara, just, you know, west of the Burbank Airport. We have a line that goes up Palmdale, Central Valley, east of the airport. Out to Colton, one line goes up to Vegas, another line goes to Yuma. You know, the railroads, and we spend slightly less than the state of California annually does on roads. We spend on maintaining our track in the 23 states that we operate in. We've invested about $1 billion in the last 7 years improving our route to California. We made that bet because we think California is going to grow, and that's why we're here. And we think railroads, and particularly Union Pacific, can play a key role in that.
Thank you. Chris.
So I'm a Northern California guy based out of Sacramento, and I make my way down to Los Angeles area about twice a month for work. And it's really amazing every time I get off the plane, usually down in Ontario, just seeing visually the economic engine that goods movement is when you get on that 60. I mean, it's nothing but trucks as far as the eye can see. And for someone that works for the California Trucking Association, obviously that makes me feel very good. I just wanted to back up something that Dr. Houston said as far as the jobs that the logistics industry provides. Pulled up some numbers, and truck drivers actually, 70% of our driving force has a high school diploma or less, and yet we're one of the top paying jobs as far as people of that demographic. So the importance of jobs for that particular sector, which all numbers that you take a look at, our current economic situation with unemployment is being driven not by college graduates, it's being driven by people with a high school education or less. So to not underestimate the importance, as much as we want to talk about green jobs, the STEM sector is the hot thing to talk about. There's a fundamental need to provide jobs to the sector that are serving the most right now. So one other thing to touch on before we get to the rest of the panel, I just wanted to say that, you know, a couple of brief statistics. The trucking industry actually moves 82% of all goods in the state of California. So, you know, as far as our contributions to the supply chain, I'd say that it's pretty significant. And we are facing some pretty major environmental standards over the next decade that I would say that the trucking industry is going to step up and meet those requirements without any significant disruption to our service to our customers. But it's something that I've noticed as far as the outreach and education to the folks out there in the community, really understanding how significant these investments are in improved greener equipment. Dr. Husen was mentioning some PM 2.5 numbers. As far as that particular pollutant, the newer equipment, the 2010 and newer model year trucks are 97 to 99% cleaner than prior generation trucks. All forecasts from sources like the Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District show that even if we weren't to pass a single regulation from this point on, that pollution would continue to fall in the South Coast Basin for the next 40 years, staying about 50% less than it is against 2010 levels. And so that's if we don't do a single thing from this point on. So that's very significant, and I hope that that word starts getting out to the communities that they understand that this $1 billion a year investment that we're making in this equipment is not in vain.
Thank you. And we're going to begin by asking a few questions, and I'm going to start with Chris. Every time I go to a business conference or, you know, industry conference here in Los Angeles, there's always conversations about the expansion of the Panama Canal. What impact will the expansion have here in the ports of Los Angeles and ports of Long Beach, and how are we preparing to be competitive with that expansion?
Yes, it's a favorite topic. We answer this quite frequently, actually, but the fact is that from From a modern marvel's point of view, the Panama Canal is pretty amazing. The expansion is even just as amazing. But the fact is, at this point, we don't see it making a big difference to us in Southern California. It will change some of the way traffic patterns will move for cargo. We can benefit from some. We just don't think at this point most of that cargo is going to move a different direction. There are many different avenues in which cargo can move, and cargo tends to find its best way to go. But we're not taking that lying down. We've got to make sure that our prognostication is correct. So by doing that, we've been working, as you mentioned, a lot of this particulate matter, our chemistry 101 stuff that we've been talking about here for the air quality. The two ports, Los Angeles and Long Beach, we spent most of the last decade sorting that issue out and making corrections and finding ways to move forward while being able to grow significantly, at the same time making sure we are not doing any more damage to the environment. That is absolutely necessary. And a lot of this is cleaning up the air, and the pollutants that come out of engines and the different projects that we have addressed that. So at this point, now we're allowed to build. We're now building, ourselves in Long Beach probably have close to about $10 billion worth of projects over the next 15 years that we're putting in. One of the biggest ones is actually not in my port, but it's next door in the Port of Long Beach. It's replacing the Gerald Desmond Bridge. If you haven't been down there, there are 3 gateways into the harbor. One of them is the Vincent Thomas Bridge on the Los Angeles side, and there's a Gerald Desmond Bridge on the Long Beach side. About 20% of everything that is sold in retail stores in North America crosses the Gerald Desmond Bridge. So it's a pretty significant location. There's about $1 billion worth of construction starting either, probably January. They're doing a lot of test work right now. They're going to start replacing that bridge. It's a late 60s era bridge, but it's just outgrown what anybody ever thought would happen in Southern California, like many other places. So that's one way we're doing it. Most of us have major projects to rebuild our terminal facilities. And if you're not familiar with the harbor, the ships come in, they tie up at a dock, and that dock unloads those ships, and it processes the containers through, and then they get picked up by a truck or go out by a train. We're trying to make them more efficient. What we're doing is, like a lot of big cities, we can't build out anymore, we have to build up, and that making the land correct for that, putting the equipment and technology in there to do that. And in addition, we also are strengthening our wharves, making the, sounds funny, what does a port do? Well, we make the water deeper. Well, that's one of the things we're doing, because bigger ships, which are more efficient, both in terms of economics and in terms of fuel burn. We have to bring those bigger ships in. We need enough water to make sure they don't touch the bottom. Both ports are being 53 feet deep, but in some cases we have piers that are 1980s era. It doesn't sound all that long ago, right? But the fact is we need to rebuild all of that because it's not big enough to handle today's environment. And it's that constant motion. There's often something said about ports, airports and ports. If you ever stop building, you're no longer effective. If you ever stop doing anything, it needs to be constant expansion. An airport can never be finished. A seaport can never be finished because the world keeps changing. There's new demands, new pressures. And this is one of the things that we're working on, and that's really what both ports are going through. There's a lot of construction going on there. We have one project that kicked off just at the absolute bottom of the recession. But we were good enough to be able to spend it because of what we had done. We were spending about $500,000 a day for 2.5 years to rebuild this facility. One thing that does happen on the waterfront is, and much like Scott's Railroads, it's tough for us to do things on at a low-cost basis. We don't do very many things for less than $100 million, and many of them cost much more than that. You do see that in the price of whatever you buy. It's a penny or two somewhere in there, but that is what we pay for and that's what we do. But we do add that economic engine to here, and we want to keep being competitive for the future. The Panama Canal is opening up. People have said, yeah, a lot of this cargo will go somewhere else. We don't think so, but we want to make sure that doesn't happen. We have a partner in the railroad sitting to my left where we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. We're going to make as efficient, we're going to be as cost effective, and we're going to be able to meet the demands of our customers, which are big shipping lines and some of the guys sitting over here, big retailers who need to bring their goods in or export their goods somewhere else. And both of those situations really affect us here on the waterfront.
I have a follow-up question. If you're Sony or Panasonic or even Toyota Motors, what is the advantage of coming here to the Port of Los Angeles versus going to the Panama Canal and going to the East Coast?
There's actually a couple different ways you look at this. If I'm Sony and Panasonic, Toyota, wherever I am going to be, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go both places because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You think about it, I mentioned these ships that are as big as the Empire State Building crossing the ocean. Well, there's storms in the ocean. These ships can you have to divert. You have to go someplace else because of weather. There's always something going on. So your best plan is to diversify. But if you have to concentrate somewhere, Southern California is one of the best places. And much like the legislature putting California on the West Coast here, we're also lucky enough to have a good population of people. People who buy things, and that really drives a lot of decisions to make. So if I'm Sony bringing in a TV set for retail purposes, whether it goes to Walmart, whether it goes to Target, whether it goes to Best Buy, or what goes to Amazon to sell online, I have to bring that in somewhere. But I also don't know where it's going to be selling most. If there's a blip somewhere, we want to bring it to Southern California because I can service the local community of Southern California, second biggest retail market in the country, or I can send it from here via rail or a truck, most likely rail, to anywhere else in the country. But I can bring it to the country here and decide at the last minute. It's very hard to sell something in California that I've brought all the way to New Jersey and have to bring it all the way back. That's not very efficient. Toyota is a different case. Toyota is something special and unique, and actually all auto manufacturers are. You're bringing stuff which is traditionally what Toyota invented called just in time. But what you're doing is you're giving yourself the most advantages to make it happen just in time. Due to the nature of our size and the volume that comes in here, people like Toyota bring a lot of goods in here because we're connecting to their plants, tend to be in the southern tier. Kentucky and Texas and Mississippi is where Toyota is manufacturing right now. But we have trains that will leave here out of Southern California and go directly to Toyota factory in Kentucky. It doesn't happen for very many people, but that's done because they can consolidate and they can get enough volume in from all the different sourcing locations. Mexico, the US, here in Southern California. We can load stuff coming out of Thailand, Japan, China, whatever we're coming to make that car can all be assembled here, put on a train, get directly there, delivered literally to their factory, and that's something pretty special. And this qualifies also for Nissan, Honda, GM, Ford, Chrysler, you name it. They're all doing the same thing. Hyundai, Kia, and their big plants there. That's all happening here. Suppliers here are delivering, and we're bringing the stuff to the nearest to their factories. But Toyota's unique because we actually deliver it right to their factory out of here. That's a pretty unique thing that doesn't really happen to many places. But that's the supply chain system that goes on. And being here, one of the reasons we grow all these warehouses here in Southern California is because you can take one piece of property and one investment and do 2 or 3 tasks in it. I'll tell one more story since I'm dominating the microphone here. If you're not familiar, JCPenney's has a warehouse in Buena Park. It was the very first warehouse to break 1 million square feet 40 years ago. And that was the biggest warehouse anywhere in the country. It was all rail served, moving things in and out of boxcars. Today, that same warehouse does 3 different tasks, and that's why it's important there in Buena Park. They do imports, bringing stuff in from overseas. They receive goods from domestic manufacturers or domestic suppliers, and they also do what they call store support, which means they package everything to put in a trailer to deliver actually to the store at the mall, and that's what we're seeing here in California. That's just one example of many, is of people doing the same thing. And I think Dr. Husing is talking about a couple different warehouses that have opened up just this week to handle these exact type of things.
And Dr. Husing, how has the economy impacted the port or the overall shipment of goods? And what's the long-term outlook for the shipping of goods?
The economy peaked in terms of imports in 2006. That was really the Asian trade explosion, peaked in 06. 8.2 million 20-foot equivalent containers that were loaded coming in through LA and Long Beach. It then dropped 25% by 09. In 2010, it came back ferociously. And in 2011 and so far this year in 2012, it has come up a little bit from those levels. This year we will probably be, there are about 4 years now out of the last 6 or 7 where we've been right in the high 7, or in the 7 million container field. So that's on the import side. On the export side, the fact that the value of the dollar has been weak has been quite beneficial to American manufacturers and American farmers because we've been exporting. And the exports through the 2 ports in this last couple of years, this year will set a record. The most containers loaded leaving any port complex in the history of the United States. will again be this year. It was last year, it was the year before. And we're seeing that occur. If you're planning on doing foreign travel, bad time to go, dollars weak. If you're trying to sell things to the rest of the world, great time, because everything we make is cheaper to our customers. Everything they sell us has become somewhat more expensive to us, and that is one of the drivers now in our economy.
Thank you. My next question is to Scott. Some are pushing for a shift from trucking as a primary source of goods movement to rail. Do you anticipate this happening? And what will be the impact that this will have on shipping cost and delivery speed?
Well, I mean, the simple answer to that is no, because there's so many things that trucks can do that railroad can't. And so in some ways, the answer to that is no. But the real answer is, depends on what you're shipping and how fast you need it there. Obviously, if the value is way high, you need it there tomorrow, it goes by air. If the value is, a little bit bigger, a little bit less time sensitive, you can deliver it door to door by truck. But that next phase, and that's what's changing quite honestly, because of the service metrics of rail and the investment made in them. If you happen to read FedEx's or listen to FedEx's quarterly earnings this week, they talked about the consumer who is, and think of all of it yourself. I mean, do I need it tomorrow or do I need it in 3 to 5 days? Well, in 3 to 5 days it's going to be a lot cheaper because it can be there by rail. And that sort of phenomenon is happening everywhere, whereas 7, 8 years ago, rail couldn't deliver it on time and couldn't deliver very well. And because of that large investment rail has made, as well as specializing in what it can do and what it cannot do, that is changing the game in that in many ways. And it's happening all over the place. I mean, for years, the lumber and everything came down from from Oregon and Washington down to LA, to the point where for the last couple of decades, hardly none of that moved by rail. And now we have an I-5 service going every day up and down the West Coast. There's a big facility out in Delano in the Central Valley where we have a train, an express train that gets filled up with all sorts of products in the Central Valley, goes to New York City. I mean, those sort of things weren't happening years ago. They are happening now because of our service metrics and our investment. And the intangible there is the tremendous ability to do that already in an environmentally friendly way. We're getting better at that. I mean, the fuel efficiency of our trains is increasing because of technology. I mean, we used to be limited to a 5,000-foot train because of distributed power, where now you put the power in the middle and the end, you can make that train longer. And it can move things even that much more efficiently. Impacts to communities we're aware of there, that we work through there, but they can clear those crossings just as quick in many ways if we stay on top of it. So, tremendous opportunity there. It's good for the environment. It's good for business. Like I said, that 150-year-old industry, lo and behold, it's coming back just like those green shorts I had from the 1960s.
Thank you. And, we've seen a lot of commercials from the railroad industry promoting their environmental progress, or the clean technology that you guys have been utilizing. And I know one of the issues, especially in legislation here in California and Los Angeles, has always been a focus on trucks and the need to improve environmental efficiency in trucks. How is the industry doing now, and are there any proposed or current proposed legislation that may continue to impact or continue to push the trucking industry to get cleaner, and what is that impact that legislation has on the trucking industry? Chris.
Well, first I just wanted to say that, there's always a temptation to pit truck and rail against each other, but I would view the situation a little bit differently. I mean, when you're handling 82% of the freight in the state, it's clearly because of some specific characteristic of your service. And with the projections and where freight is expected to grow in the next several years, I think that there's enough cargo to go around for all modes. And I could say specifically from the environmental side with trucking, we're to levels of technology that are so clean. You're talking about a 0.01 gram per brake horsepower hour standard for PM 2.5, near zero emissions for NOx. We're not done there. There's several fleets that are moving heavily into natural gas vehicles. UPS is exploring hydraulic hybrid technology. The first zero-emission truck commercially available, I can almost guarantee you, will be in Southern California. We're not quite finished yet, even though, I said that there's those remarkable gains in environmental quality that we've already had to this point. There's going to be further gains in the future, and we're going to get to levels that are going to be so low, I don't really know what we're going to be fighting about with the environmentalists after that point. So, it's really a situation where I think that if we can strike the right balance, because we have so much good forward momentum with environmental issues in our particular industry, that we can start looking at, well, we're spending a lot of time and money to figure out how to clean up these engines. Now, how do we start providing people jobs? How do we start growing the economy a little bit, restoring that balance a little more toward the center? I think that that's going to be beneficial for the citizens of this particular area in our industry. And then just one last thing, as far as the type of technology that we're employing, the 2010 and newer technology is the equivalent of, if you want to go an off-road engine, a Tier 4. And as far as any of the freight modes are concerned, I know that the trucking industry is way ahead in adopting the cleanest technology right now. So it's not something that's really well known. We don't maybe publicize it quite as well as we should, but the trucking industry, believe it or not, is actually way out ahead of the curve as far as the EPA technology is concerned.
Now, Javier, I'd like to jump in there with a couple of numbers, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
One of the things I track is the CARB has throughout the Inland Empire, actually throughout California, stations. If you look at PM 2.5, which is the major issue for both rail and for trucking, if you go to San Bernardino, right next to BNSF's big intermodal facility, their PM 2.5 has dropped 93.4% in the last decade, down to where there was only 5 days over the national standard. If you go to Ontario, where there's 99 million square feet of industrial, so heavily used by trucking, it's down 91.4% to 6.8 days over the national standard for PM 2.5. So this has changed dramatically in the last decade, and the data coming from CARB demonstrates it.
Certainly progress has been made in making our trucks and other transportation modes more environmental friendly, but of course legislators continue or always like to push the envelope. And we've already mentioned hydrogen or gas powered trucks, but what's next in terms of that technology? There was rumors about electrifying the 710 freeway.
No rumors.
Well, they're not rumors. There's actually thoughts of doing that. What is the future of transportation looking 10 years ahead?
There's two things that I know being considered at the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach right now. One is zero emissions between the ports and the ICTF, which is the near dock rail, and the SCIG, which is what's proposed by BNSF, using one of two technologies, either plug-in electric or alternatively hydrogen fuel cell. Those are thoughts that are out there looking at a 2010 period of time. One of the things you already see, and Chris already looked at, is if you take a company like Cal Cartage. Cal Cartage has in excess of 1,000 trucks. They've got between 300 and 400 LNG trucks that they're using now. They tend to be closer to the ports where the stations are, but again, that's a technology that we see moving forward, which is quite clean. It isn't zero, but it's quite clean.
Yeah, I think that the answer to that question is that we don't really know what the next step in the technology is going to be, and I can say pretty confidently that I'd be speaking for even the people who are looking at this at CARB. I don't think that they really know what that technology is going to be. The particular project that Dr. Houston was talking about, there are discussions to incorporate a concept from the Siemens Corporation called eHighway onto the 710, and also do the initial demonstration to the near dock rail facilities. That would involve an overhead catenary system similar to what you see in some municipal bus fleets, light rail, where trucks would actually put up what's called a pantograph to connect to a offshore power to power a hybrid system for a truck. So that would be completely zero emissions while you are actually connected to the power source, and then you would run on a traditional combustion engine while you're off of it. Whether or not that's going to be a dominant technology going forward, really can't say. But we are also doing a pilot project with a hydrogen fuel cell truck as well, Class 8. So, stay tuned. We'll know maybe in the next decade, hopefully.
Yeah, we're going back to 1945 San Francisco buses.
Well, I want to open it up for questions from the audience. If you can please let us know who you're directing the question to, and please ask questions. And I would cut any long commentary that are said. So, sir, you'll be the first one.
I'm Paul Brodini. This is for Chris and Scott, really. I think. Some weeks back, the director of MARAD was out here, spoke one day out of the RAND Corporation under a program sponsored by Future Ports, and then came back and made a similar presentation to the LA Chamber. And he made some extraordinarily compelling arguments as to why we should not be concerned here in Los Angeles about the Panama Canal. And he was speaking about backlands, unavailability in ports all along the East Coast, looking from Boston all the way down to places like Savannah. And also he made the same observation about the Gulf Coast. And he put up a slide that showed a kind of fringe along the East Coast coming around Florida and along the Gulf, where they could be serviced by shippers coming through the canal. But then there was a huge area in like west of Appalachia and into the Midwest that could not be serviced because of the inadequacy, draft, backlands, things like that at the ports. He said, on the other hand, we out here are in good shape. My question for you, gents, is that there's an implicit statement there, and that is if there's a delta in volume, it's probably going to come here. Do we have Wilmington kind of stopping the port of Los Angeles, and we have the Palos Verdes Peninsula limiting our capacity for backlands, and then we have the issues of train capacity for not only building trains but getting them out of Los Angeles. When do we approach the point where we have troubles servicing the volume that might come to us?
Well, let me answer that first. I mean, as I mentioned, we made $1 billion bet, and we're making another $1 billion bet that it's coming here. And that billion is solving the problem you're talking about, whether it's facilities, whether it's double track, whether it's things like that. And that's investment, private investment that railroads are making to make that work. And we need some things port side with the ICTF, and there's some things important there. And so our view and our vision is much as director, is the MARAD director. But I will tell you this, it's not like everybody else is taking this one laying down. I mean, when you look across the country, you look at synergies between ports and rails and state governments. You got the Heartland Corridor, Virginia coming in, which is a $250 million project that now been funded. You have the Crescent Corridor, which is starting in New Orleans, going up with the rail companies where they're building intermodal facilities, about $1 billion project. You got the Northern Gateway project out of Virginia, where you have those things going on, all done in the name of Panama Canal traffic's coming here. And so I don't say that we don't think it's going to happen. That's why we're investing our dollars here. But I'm telling you, there's a lot of momentum going to get. Just this morning, Houston gives a resolution. They need bigger trucks because of all the produce that's coming from the Panama Canal. They have to find a way to handle because so a lot of things are going on. But the inertia has it staying here. Progress over 10, 20, 30 years could change that.
Tackling some of Scott's things, from kind of the ocean perspective, from what we're seeing, we have a lot of excess capacity here in Southern California. A lot of it has to do with, to take better advantage of it, it's slowly adding additional technologies in. It's changing the way we operate. One of the big things that we're trying to go for is going higher. That's really where a lot of our, yes, you're right, Wilmington and the Palos Verdes Peninsula aren't going anywhere, so we can't necessarily expand that way. But we have a lot of room to go up. We also have a lot of room to move it faster. We did a study a number of years back, I think when things were hot in 06, saying, geez, what are we going to do? Because our projections say we're going to run out of space much more quickly. And we looked at one thing and said, if a container never sat at one of our piers for longer than 48 hours, we could more than double our throughput and take away land. So it's really about velocity. It's about movement. You know, people mention just in time and a few other things. It's not always, that's not always how things work. There's stuff that sits for quite a while. People don't pick it up that quickly. Metal boxes are great, cheap warehouses. And unfortunately, when they put it on the dock, they're a little less convenient for us on the waterfront, metal boxes in the way, because it sits there, you have to handle them several times, it always costs more money. So it's about velocity, it's about throughput. And the other thing that, you know, we will remain competitive. I mean, our goal is to remain competitive. We partner with guys like the railroads because we know it's about moving that cargo faster, better, and more reliably. Most of what we've seen come out of the downturn has been, I don't necessarily want my cargo faster, but I want the same time, same place every week. It is, I get off the ship, it gets processed, it goes onto a train, and it gets delivered to Memphis, Chicago, Dallas, wherever it's going, same day, every day, all the time. So I know my warehouse, I don't have to buy any more warehousing because I know it's coming in the same time. And that's really where we have that advantage, but we also make that decision later. There's a lot of investment going on in a lot of ports because we know we all need to keep growing because that's how we keep doing things. East Coast is doing some good stuff, but the fact is it's not cheap and it's not free, nor is the Panama Canal. So they're doing all this work, but they got to pay for it. So the price advantage that they might have in today's scenario might not equal that later. In addition, one of the advantages we haven't really talked about was, at least for the time being, we don't see a replacement for combustion engines when it comes to ships moving. So the price of fuel will make a big difference. We are about 8,000 to 9,000 miles from most of our ports in Asia. You're looking at 18,000 to 20,000 miles potentially to going to the East Coast. It's a lot more fuel burn. And if you're buying a new ship, $150 million. You can service Asia to Los Angeles with 5 or 6 ships, so about $500 million. If you're going to the East Coast, you need 12 ships probably, so I don't know, $15 billion worth of ships. It adds up. I'm sorry, $7 billion worth of ships. But anyway, there's a lot of pieces out of that puzzle that are going to keep us remaining competitive. Our job is, both here at our port and any other port, is to make sure we're doing as efficiently and productively as possible to help the exporter and to help the importer to move the stuff across the dock. So yes, we have some physical limitations. We're not going to fill in the rest of the bay like we've done in the past. The flip side is we have a lot of ways to move this more efficiently, faster, better, and hopefully at a better price point. We have a 25-year head start on all the rest of the ports. That's the beauty of Southern California. We've already spent that money. We've already gotten ahead of where they are. We've already put those things in place. So I think that's what's going to keep us competitive. But like Scott said, we got to always keep an eye out behind us. Who's going on? We're number one. Everybody wants to knock off number one. It's like in sports. If you're number one, everybody's psyched up to knock you down. And we got to keep that mentality going. And it's very hard to convince that to people. Say, you know, especially when you have to do with government. We are the government, but the elected government saying, haven't you had enough? Why do we need to do this? And it's that connection it's the jobs, it's providing for people here in California, both import and exports. And that often gets lost a lot these days is that export side of things. We want to move the stuff, and we have the facilities to do it. Probably one of the hardest things we're doing is handling all that newfound volume from America's farmers wanting to go to Asia. Because we spent 25 years not doing it, and you can't build these things overnight. And that's one of the things we're here for.
Thank you. Questions? Sir?
Yeah, my name is Paul Sabalik. I represent a client that is from India, and currently they're exporting materials from various Midwestern sites through Norfolk and Houston. Part of what they do is this logistics and movement, and they're looking to open up a logistics facility on the West Coast. Tell me cost efficiency between San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
I serve them all.
Yeah. Talk to Scott.
That'll cost you too.
That's right. I think, John, you'll have to answer, but I have a couple of things too I guess we can start with. If your client's going to India, the shortest distance is going to India.
And I think we can also expand on the question on, you know, India's fastly becoming the next China. At least that's what we're saying. So does that benefit the East Coast, West Coast, or what impact would that have in shipments?
It's a conversation we were having outside.
That's right. We didn't plant this question, but it was on the track the whole time.
Especially since Walmart was allowed to go into India now.
That's right. We have to use our geography skills, and looking at sea routes, the shortest distance from India to the United States is generally speaking going to be through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean and across the ocean to the East Coast. That's just a natural progression of where we go. There's a tipping point in the map somewhere between India and Singapore, and that's usually where you decide which way you're going to go, over the Pacific or via the Suez Atlantic, that direction. So that's when you do it. There are so many parameters of what you're trying to do in terms of when you're deciding where to go and where to move. It's Scott's input on if you're moving it by rail. It is, are you going to build your own facility, and how much is the land going to cost? How much is that going to be? How close you are to your end user? In terms of, are you trying to get to the port? You know, to be close? Do you want to be a little farther away? Where's the value in there? And I think that's what's kind of leading into John's ideas.
Yeah, if you're going to put a facility that's going to handle the stuff, you're going to put it in the Inland Empire, the 2 inland counties of Southern California, for 3 reasons. One, there is an enormous amount of dirt still available out there. That dirt is much less expensive than it is in any of the other places that you've decided. So your facility is going to cost less. Second, there is a labor force out there that is a blue-collar labor force that works for less than they do in the coastal counties simply because they don't want to commute. You have nothing like that in the other 2 places that you're cited in terms of the quantity of labor available. Third is distance. You're not that far from the ports of LA and Long Beach when you're in the inland region. And you're also on the 10 and the 15 freeways, which are the 2 principal routes out of Southern California going east. One going through the southern tier of states, Arizona, New Mexico, et cetera. The other going through the 15 going up through Las Vegas and Utah and going up to the Midwest. So it is the play, and it is the reason why that area has seen millions of square feet being built by just about every major company that's moving stuff. The other thing that you're seeing is because there's so much of that out there now, the technology in the buildings is becoming quite extraordinary. We just had the most recent facility open, well, actually, Amazon opened yesterday with their big facility to cover the western area in San Bernardino out there. The previous building was 1,800,000 square feet, 50 feet high, and that's Skechers in Moreno Valley. Nobody works in it. It's entirely robotic. There are 600 people working there, care and feeding for the equipment. And so the level of education that they need to have, you know, ITT tech senior people being able to handle it. And that's kind of where the technology's going. And again, out in that area, we now have a lot of experience in starting to learn how to train those kind of folks.
Just to correct this, they're not going to just ship to India, they're shipping to Pacific Rim.
Okay.
But they're looking for a West Coast gateway.
That would be by far, because if you go look at the Bay Area, you're talking Tracy. You're not talking about being anywhere near Port of Oakland. If you're up in the Seattle area, again, it's very expensive around that area, much more than you would find. You know, I'm doing a commercial because I'm the economist for the Inland Empire Economic Partnership, but this happens to be if we kind of laughingly say that logistics is for us what the computer chip is for Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Question?
I probably slept through part of what happened over the last few years, but when Mark Pisano was head of SCAG, he talked a great deal about the fact that Mexico was going to open up an enormous port, you know, take off all that Panama traffic, and that they would have rail and truck facilities that weren't hamstrung by the very stringent, you know, zero-emission vehicle regulations and things. I don't know where that is or what's happening here, but is that still a threat to Long Beach and LA?
Yeah, actually, that was the question I had in my mind. And in addition to answer that question, maybe the fluidity between Mexico and U.S. shipments, if you can add that as well. Who wants to take that on?
Well, we have 6 border crossings to Mexico on our system, starting in Brownville all the way over to Calexico. And so there's a lot of projects that goes back and forth. Specifically, the Punta Colonet project, which I think you're talking about there. There was a point in time where UP was part of Hutchison-Whampoa, looking in as possibly investing in that property. Hutchison, 2 years ago, I don't know what's happened since then. I remember there was somebody claiming that was really going to happen, and Hutchison-Whampoa, who owned the property, said, we're trying to sell it. So what do you think that means? And so, I mean, a lot of difficulty and uncertainty for those kind of dollars was the issue there. We backed out as an investor several years ago. You'd have to build a new railroad, to make that thing work. It just depends on what's possible. I mean, in 06 and 07, some of those things are starting to make sense. They don't in 2013. Will they in 17 and 27? We don't know. But there certainly is opportunities still in Guaymas down there, and we're seeing some increase in export there. And so, there's a lot of trade going back for Mexico. You read about some of the offshoring coming back from the Pacific Rim back to Mexico. There's, that traffic's up for us, coming back and forth.
To echo some of what Scott said, yes, that was a big deal a few years back, and you're right, it was looking like something was going to happen just because between regulations and productivity, we just couldn't catch up. The downturns kind of changed those numbers. We were also projecting, growth rates at exponential numbers that we soon quickly came to realize were just not realistic. Americans have to buy so much every day, all you do, you wouldn't work. You just spend your days buying things at store shelves. I mean, volume was incredible.
It's my wife.
We're not naming names. We're just, but that being said, that will always be a threat. There's always somebody with the newest thing. And again, that's why we keep investing. We have to keep looking at these things. And yes, that was a direct threat. That was a direct thing saying, we're sick and tired of dealing with anything in California, let's go to Mexico and do it. The tough part was, at the end of the day, is that cargo, no matter what you do in the waterfront, whether you're building it in Mexico or anywhere else, it just gets expensive building in the water. And Scott had to build a brand new railroad that was billions. And it was billions of dollars to build that facility. And, that's not always the best solution. The newest port that really opened up was a place up in Canada, which has, taken a nice little piece of market share, but the fact is it's a very, very big gamble, and it's not the easiest thing to do. And the tough thing, of course, too, is there are still problems shipping in and out of Mexico, especially when you're coming from a third country. If you're coming from China, going to Mexico and the United States, there's still some paperwork issues, and the U.S. government, federal regulators, take some pretty tight views of some of that stuff, because what exactly you're bringing in, where did it go, and how did it get handled. So there's a lot of pieces of this moving part. There's some ports farther south of Mexico that are definitely moving up in the world, but Mexico is doing a lot more production. You're right, there's production moving there. So I think we have to keep an eye on it, but I think it's the 2017 and beyond number even then before we're starting to talk about something there in Mexico.
Just a quick follow-up on that. You mentioned China. Isn't it the Chinese government or some companies from China actually managing those ports in Mexico and in the Panama Canal? Like they were trying to come to Los Angeles several years back, and they made an offer to manage the port of Los Angeles. Do you remember that?
Yes. That was more of a reporter not doing their homework type of mentality. There are companies who do manage ports. There's companies, private companies that build ports. The state of California, and I believe everywhere but maybe a couple places down south and maybe Texas, but for the most part, everything I know on the West Coast, the land is property of the government. Like for the Port of Los Angeles, we are landlord. We build and lease.
But didn't the city council have to vote on that?
They have to vote on the leases, but that by state law, and the city council can't overrule the state law. The state law says that the waterfront lands remain in the public domain. So everything in the Port of Los Angeles remains in the public area. We lease it out for long periods of time. And absolutely, we have companies from all over the world running facilities on our waterfront with 30-year leases, 20-year leases. Everybody has that up around the coast because they're the expert terminal operators. They're the ones experts at moving in and out, or they're the ones who own the ships. But they can't own the land. They have to work with whatever entity is there. And generally speaking, ports, at least in the United States, do not get to be privately held. They have to remain in the public domain. So that was a discussion, and what they're specifically referring to is a company was bought by an investment group from one of these places, and they were merely an operator. But it got lost in the translation that they were owning the port. Not quite the case, but
What about Mexico and Panama Canal?
they can do whatever they want. That's different countries.
Wampoa was like 40% of the, they own and operate 40% of the ports in the world. That was the company looking at, what do you call that?
They're out of Hong Kong.
Just continuing the conversation about Mexico, one of the agreements in NAFTA was for the free flowing of goods between both countries, and one of the issues was essentially concerns about bringing Mexican trucks. Where do we stand on that issue, and especially what's the position of the California Trucking Association?
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting byproduct of some of the Air Resources Board regulations, is that with the cross-border truck population, you're actually going to see the opposite, where a lot more American carriers are going to get into the business of becoming MX authority certified, taking over more of that cross-border operation, because what's occurring right now is that we have about 700 trucks that exclusively service that area, where the general consensus is that almost none of them are going to be able to meet CARB regs, especially with a new interpretation that this more stringent drayage rule actually applies to anyone hauling a container over the border of Mexico. So the requirements that they thought they were going to be facing actually advanced about 2 years and caught everyone off guard. So what we have now is a lot of the larger American carriers talking about, well, we don't necessarily want to do it, but we're going to end up having to take more custody of the cargo as it goes across the border, whereas before there really wasn't an economic incentive to actually become an MX carrier on the American side. It was more, you could get a cheaper rate by pairing with a partner down on the Mexican side, but that's all going to go away with the new CARB regs. So in that respect, it kind of shows you, well, we had to bite the bullet first in California, but that's made us a lot more ready to take advantage of situations like are happening right now at the border.
I think we have time for one more question, possibly two. Yes, sir?
A lot of issues have been covered in the environment, certainly infrastructure, private investment. There's also tax money that your industries use. Is that correct?
Not very much.
Okay. But all in all things taken, in the end, good business decisions?
Well, I'll address part of it since I'm up here. Just so you know, the ports in California, any of the ports from San Diego up to Redwood City, the rules that govern us by the state say we don't take tax money from the general populace. We don't use Sacramento tax money, anybody else's tax money. We are self-sufficient. In exchange, Sacramento doesn't take our money either. So we are, while we're a government agency, we're self-funding. We do all that. We do get to bond by using government bonds because we are a government agency. We actually, most ports have very, very high rated bonds because people can't steal our money to use in other projects. It's a closed loop. It pays itself back much like a toll road does. It is, if you're talking about, the margins aren't great in shipping and logistics. They're not great. I think Scott can back you up on that. Is the operating ratios that you see in a railroad. Shipping lines are actually a disaster right now. Almost all of them are losing millions. But the fact is it's a great business to work in because every day is different. And it's exciting and it keeps going. We talk about 1 million square foot warehouse in the Inland Empire. We're talking about trains, we're talking trucks. It's an interesting business. There's good things to go out of it. It's a long-term view. It's not short-term investment. Generally speaking, it's long-term. It's a lot of very capital intensive and tough to get returns on, but it's a pretty stable environment. That's my take, at least.
Coming off a record year and reporting a record quarter yesterday, I can't run from the fact that business is good for railroads. But the answer, there's very little public money in there. I mean, we own and operate 32,000 miles of track, own our terminals. We do find some opportunities to partner with public entities. Oftentimes, I see a lot of public entities, they're form a partnership. They really want to talk to the philanthropic arm of the railroad, which I also is under my hat. But there are some business opportunities. Colton Crossing is a great one here in the Southern California. It's been an example of marrying some private and some public dollars to do things that otherwise couldn't be done. But the railroads primarily own and operate on our own right-of-way.
Where there is an issue frankly, is with the road infrastructure, because you've got an awful lot of goods that need to move around. The population keeps growing, the volumes keep going up, and we have not invested in our infrastructure. Southern California really handles a huge share of the national trade, both in and out of this country. Washington, D.C. has been unavailable in terms of really helping deal with that. Part of our problem, frankly, is we have 2 U.S. senators. If you go up the East Coast, there's all kinds of U.S. senators in those tiny little states. And the result of that is we tend to be underfunded from the federal government, dealing with an issue that federal trade policy creates for us. And so we find ourselves increasingly having to fund the transportation infrastructure, particularly, again, the roads, highways, things like that, ourselves, because the federal government just hasn't stepped up to the plate.
Okay, we have time for one short question and one short answer. And while we're answering the question, please complete this form. That's the evaluation for today's panel. So while we're answering that, please complete it. And one last question, short question from the audience. Yes.
Hi, I'm Barbara Wilson at BFC. And I just had a question. When we spoke about the standards, the environmental standards that are impacting traffic over the next 10 years, what do you see for business opportunities within industries and really towards entrepreneurs and small businesses?
Yeah, I think that what you've found with, let's just talk about some of the sectors that have gone through the standards ahead of what the statewide rule is that in the ports of LA and Long Beach, we lost about a quarter of the truck capacity, but what we found was that there was probably some excess capacity at the time that we lost it. So the carriers who were able to make the upgrades and get a little bit ahead of the game with cleaner equipment found that they actually did have more business at the end of the day than they had before. I can't say that that's going to be the case with every single micro industry that is trucking. You know, there's a lot of different sub-markets that are served by trucks. But we're trying to stress the fact that if you're making the investments in cleaner technology, you're really on the right side of history, so to speak. We're not going to necessarily go back to the days where we had 30-year-old trucks running non-low sulfur diesel. Those days are not coming back, and so we really need to recalculate our cost basis on cleaner equipment, a faster equipment turnover, and I think that
item for a lot of my bigger clients. They really want to go down that route, whether they create a shell that gives you some native features, like I said, which, you know, there's certain things that you can do with an HTML5 and there's certain things you cannot. And, you know, as